Good morning, brethren. Happy Sabbath to you and special welcome to those who are online and to the visitors in our midst today. It is good to be here once again because we are seeing things that can give us hope. Brethren, Christ gave many signs relative to the time when his return will be imminent. But there are a few that give almost a deadline when that event will occur. And we're commanded as his followers to watch. In Matthew chapter 24, let's take a look at that. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 42. He was speaking specifically to his disciples in that day, but it extends to whoever would be considered his disciples. Let's jump back up to verse 42. He says, "Watch you therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord will come. But know this, that if the good man of the house, if the householder had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have allowed his house to be broken into." And verse 44, "Therefore, be you also ready, for in such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man will come." Meaning that we ought to take note of the signs that he gave to his disciples, and you can read the rest of Matthew 24. When he gave a whole lot of signs, wars and rumors of wars, pestilences, famines, great tribulation, etc. You can read that to get the full picture that he gave. So those signs were the signs in response to a question. When shall these things be? And he gave them a whole list. But they're not the only ones that we need to be aware of. And so today, brethren, we want to look at some of the key signs that give almost a timeline to that return. And if you want a title for this sermon, it is simply entitled, Watch. Watch. Well, let's go and return to Daniel chapter 2 and revisit that dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Because, like I said, it gives almost a timeline. Now, as you may know, the dream that he had with the statue of a man, head of gold, chest and arms, silver, the abs and the thighs of brass or bronze, some say, and the legs and the feet of iron, and the feet specifically was mixture of iron and clay. And these gave a summary of 4 world-ruling kingdoms, Gentile kingdoms, that would rule the earth, especially in the area of the Middle East, starting there with the head of gold, which was Babylon. Today, modern Iraq. And it would expand to what was called Asia Minor, Turkey and places like that, the Balkans, and from there to Europe. Various kingdoms would occupy different locations at different times. And in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the man with the head of gold represented the kingdom of Babylon at that time under Nebuchadnezzar. And you can go read in Daniel 2 verses 32 and 33. And the head represented that. Now each of the body parts, the head, chest and arms, belly and abs, the legs and feet, represented the kingdom. But the other three parts did not identify a specific kingdom. Only the head said, this is Babylon. But Daniel chapter 5 and verse 31 predicted the second kingdom. Chest and arms of silver, that was predicted and specified to be the Medo-Persian Empire that overthrew Babylon. And Daniel chapter 8 and verse 7 described the third kingdom as Grecia or Greece. And we know that today being the Greco-Macedonian Empire, which defeated the Medes and the Persians and ruled for a couple of 100 years. Well, close to 100 years anyway. The fourth kingdom represented by the legs, we know from history, is the Roman Empire. And the offspring of the Roman Empire that became known as the Holy Roman Empire. And this is where the Bible begins to give that timeline that I mentioned earlier. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 2 and let's read from verse 41. Well, it says, and whereas you saw the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom, the fourth kingdom, shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron. For as much as that you saw that iron was mixed with clay in that image. And verse 42. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken, partly fragile, strong, a mixture of strong and fragility here. And verse 43, and whereas you saw iron mixed with clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Some interpret that to mean that there would be marriages amongst them, the various nations in Europe. I don't think that's the correct interpretation because it is referring to the whole kingdom, not just a couple of people getting intermarried. But the people in each kingdom will mingle themselves, but they won't cleave to one another because they've got different nationalities, they've got different concepts, different histories, behaviors, national attitudes. So they won't bond. They will mix but not bond. And we're seeing that today. Because today we have an entity called the European Union, which sprang out of the fourth kingdom. And you've got people of different nationalities. Swedes aren't like Germans. The French, definitely not like Germans. The French tend to be more liberal in their attitudes, especially regarding sex. The Germans are more studious and intellectually oriented, which is why they've dominated Europe for so long. And there are so many people of German ancestry who became rulers in the Holy Roman Empire over time. And they're totally different from the Italians, who tend to be more, as they say, fiery in their behavior, and you hear it in their speech. I was on a train one night going through Europe, and the Italians was there, and they were the noisiest bunch of people you could find. But you go on a train with Germans, and that's not so. They're very conservative and staid. They don't make all that noise, except perhaps if they come from a football game where some alcohol might have been involved. But they're different. So they won't bond as one group, and this is what the scripture is predicting here. And verse 44, and in the days of these kings, the 10 toes represent kings, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Referring now to the stone which represented the fifth kingdom that would arise. Strike the statue on its feet and smash it to smithereens, as they say, to dust. And the wind came and they blew them away. And that gave a synopsis of things that would occur over time. The 10 toes represent these 10 kings who will form the fourth kingdom just before Christ returns. So we can clearly see the aspect of a timeline. When these 10 kings form, and they've got this 10 union, around that time Christ will be. Because they will comprise the fourth kingdom and will be ruling at that point in time. But as I said before, this kingdom is different from the earlier aspect of the fourth kingdom, the Roman Empire, from the days of the Caesars, when the kings or the emperors who ruled in the days of the Caesars were all from Italy. But then there came a time when the Italian aspect of it was overthrown. Germanic tribes infiltrated from North Africa, Tunisia and places like that, and they invaded Italy, Rome. They burnt Rome down. And 3 Germanic tribes ruled in Rome, or the western leg of the empire, for close to 100 years. And the Bible called that ruling a deadly wound that the empire received. But the deadly wound was healed, meaning that the 2 legs represented 2 aspects of the empire, the western leg and the eastern leg. The eastern leg was ruled from modern-day Turkey. It was called the Byzantine Empire. It was merely an arm of the Roman Empire. And it was ruled by a gentleman named Constantine the Great. And during the lifetime somewhere there, the Roman Empire was now reunited to form the whole empire once again. But the difference this time is a religious body became involved. It was at the behest of this religious entity that the empire became united. Because 3 Germanic tribes occupied Rome. First it was the Vandals. And then they were replaced. And you had another Germanic group coming, the Heruli. And then you had the Ostrogoths. Until finally one day, another Roman ruling from the eastern leg, Justinian, came down into Italy at the behest of this religious entity that at that time was called the Bishop of Rome. Today we refer to him as the Pope. And at the instigation of the Bishop of Rome, the emperor in the eastern leg came down, removed all the Germanic influences, and joined the empire once again. And from that time onwards, the Bishop of Rome, aka the Pope, had strong influences on that empire. They began to crown emperors directly. They had power in one instance to have an emperor groveling in the snow barefoot because the Pope threatened to excommunicate him. And he came down there and had him outside in the snow barefoot, begging to be reunited with the church and being allowed to go and say mass, etc., etc. So that was the kind of power that they had. It was called the Middle Ages for lots of times. And if you go and you read, check it out, the Catholic Church dominated Europe for a long, long time during the Holy Roman Empire. So the empire now, after it was reunited, it rose and it fell. It would come one day, it would last for a while, and then it would fall. And that happened so far 6 times. The first time it happened, you had Justinian reuniting them. And within a little more than 100 years, the empire collapsed. But then another emperor came up, a gentleman by the name of Charlemagne. He was of Germanic ancestry. And he revived the Holy Roman Empire. But when he died, not too long thereafter, the empire collapsed again. Until sometime later, another German, Otto the Great, came in, revived the empire. It lasted a while, and it collapsed again. Until another emperor rose. And we had the Habsburg Empire now stepping in, which is Austria. Austria is right next door to Germany. And some say they're virtually one people. They speak the same language, and they have the same history. But the Habsburg Empire ruled, and at the time Columbus was sailing down here and discovering places, so this, as they say. The Habsburg Empire was ruling in Italy, in Europe. The King and Queen of Spain, that he supposedly colonized these islands in their name, were married. One of them was, the king was married to a Habsburg. So you had that element continuing. And then when the Habsburg Empire collapsed, you had Napoleon stepping in. He didn't last too long, maybe about 8-10 years. And here's how the Bible described some of these things. Let's go to Revelation 17. Revelation 17. It speaks of in verse 3 it says, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And a woman is a symbol of a church. And upon her forehead was the name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now it symbolized a corrupt religious system closely linked with the fourth kingdom. She rides the beast, which is the symbol of an empire or kingdom, with 7 heads and 10 horns. Revelation 17:9-10, it tells us, here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, not mountains that you see outside, but mountains are again symbols for a kingdom on which the woman sits. Now some attempt to link this to the 7 hills of Rome. That's not what it's talking about. Verse 10 tells us there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. So clearly it isn't referring to mountains. 5 kings, 7 kings, 5 are fallen. And kings represent kingdoms also. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. The one that is the 6th head. And the other, the 7th, is not yet come. And when the 7th comes, he must continue a short space. And the Bible had a complicated thing and referred to it as the beast that was and is not and yet is, because like I said, it would come on the scene, last for a while, and then collapse. But then it would come back again. Justinian collapsed. Some hour later, Charlemagne came. But when Charlemagne collapsed, it went in abeyance for a couple of 100 years. But then Otto the Great came. And when Otto the Great collapsed, a hiatus again, and then the Habsburg Empire came. And so the Bible referred to that ascendancy and collapsing, ascendance and collapsing, the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now, why is this relevant to us? Because we're seeing developments that if we understand what is being portrayed here, it is beginning to show some serious signs perhaps that we may not be aware of. Now, as I said before, the 5 that were fallen was Justinian, Charlemagne, Otto the Great, the Habsburg Empire, and Napoleon. And then it says 1 is. And the prophecy is written from the perspective of the 6th revival, 1 is. Because you wouldn't know that 5 have fallen until they fell. Because, let's say for argument's sake, you were at the time of the 4th. You wouldn't know that necessarily, that 5 have fallen. So the only time you could know that 5 were fallen is after they had fallen. And so the prophecy is written from the perspective of 1 is, which was the Nazi fascist Italian with Mussolini, when they combined to revive what they call the Holy Roman Empire. And Mussolini clearly referred to his thing as the Holy Roman Empire reborn. And he went down to Tunisia and Somalia. Local Calypsonians here even composed calypsos. When Mussolini went down into Ethiopia and colonized it, you can listen to some of the old Calypsonians, Growling Tiger, one of these, sang about that at that point in time. Hitler said the Third Reich, which is what he called his. Why do you think he called it the Third Reich? Because the First Reich was Charlemagne. And the Second Reich was Otto the Great. And the Third Reich was going to be him. German. So he called his government the Third Reich. And listen to how long he said it was going to last. 1,000 years. That's not an accident, brethren. He got that from the Bible. That God will set up a kingdom that would last for 1,000 years. And there are lots of other things that the Nazis envisioned or they saw. They saw the Jews as being removed, as quote-unquote God's people, being replaced by the Germanic peoples. So they had no hesitation in wiping out whoever else, and especially the Jews. You guys not worthy, it's us. And so they eliminated 6 million of them in what they call the final solution. The other that has not yet come represents the seventh and final revival of the fourth kingdom. The Holy Roman Empire. Let's go back to Revelation 17 and verse 12. Here's what it says. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. Remember Daniel with the 10 toes. They're paralleling one another. This is giving us a different perspective now. More information. They have received no kingdom as yet. They're in the future. They haven't come yet. But they will receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And verse 13, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. And note verse 14, these shall make war with the Lamb, with Christ, when he returns. And the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they who are with him, meaning the saints, Christians, whom he will resurrect, are called and chosen and faithful. Then the angel said unto me, the waters which you saw, where the whore or the loose moraled woman of Revelation 2, 3, etc. up there, it says they represent people and multitudes and nations and tongues, different languages. And the 10 horns which you saw upon the beast, these shall hate this religious entity that the Bible refers to as the whore, and shall make her desolate. That's the future, the fate that will await that entity. Make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Why? Because it says in verse 17, for God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and to give their kingdom to the beast, this now revived fourth kingdom, until the works of God be fulfilled. And the woman which you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. A tiny city, smaller than the Queen's Park Savannah, rules over the kings of the earth. You saw presidents going down there. When the bishop died recently, how could such a tiny space, smaller than the Queen's Park Savannah, have a president come down to a funeral? Accredits ambassadors. United States has an ambassador to the Vatican City. India has an ambassador to the Vatican City. England has ambassadors. The Bible refers to that relationship as ruling over the kings of the earth. How and why? A little space. I mean, you see it on TV and you see the big circular. That is most of the space in Vatican City. It can hold maybe 100,000 people. So how is it of this great significance and importance that the kings of the earth, the leaders and rulers, would now look to send ambassadors there? And at certain times, all of them would go down and be present when a new one is coronated or the death of one. Says God will put it in their minds. Now, how does all this fit into this context? Again, recognize that the 10 kings are ruling in the final revival of this fourth kingdom, the Holy Roman Empire, which comes from Europe. All of the revivals have been in Europe. And to the extent that they would have spread to other areas, but they started in Europe. But there has never been a willing confederation of rulers who formed the Roman Empire. The previous revivals have had one individual, who conquered other countries. And you can go look again. Germany conquered Poland, France, Belgium, Finland and these places. When the Nazis ruled Europe, they were attempting to conquer Britain with the war. When they attacked England at the time of Churchill, they were looking to conquer all of Europe. So countries did not come together willingly before. But the Bible says they will do so now in the final revival. Which will consist of 10 kings who will join together and give their national power and strength to what the Bible calls the beast. And it says God will put it in their minds to join together. Now, how is he going to do this? Will he simply create a desire in them to confederate? Or will there be some other influence? Note that verse 14 of Revelation 17. It says, "These shall make war with the Lamb." And the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. So could one of the reasons why they confederate be to join together for purposes of fighting wars? Now, not as yet conscious within them to fight Christ, but we see developments taking place. Now, why will they want to fight Christ, you would say? Let's look at Revelation 19. Revelation 19, and let's read from verse 19. He says, "And I saw the beast," the final revival of the kingdom now, "and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse, and against his army," referring to Christ. "And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet, aka the Bishop of Rome, who worked miracles before him, with which he deceived them who had received the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. And these both were cast alive into a lake burning with fire and brimstone." But back to this idea of the nations uniting for the purpose of waging war. A few months ago, a lady by the name of Ursula von der Leyen, a German lady, she was born in Belgium, apparently is quite brilliant. She first studied economics, and then sometime later, she went and she studied medicine, became a doctor. Later on, she went and got a doctorate in medicine. And later, masters in public health, dealing with epidemiology. She was a former German defense minister. And she's the current president of the European Commission. And she laid out plans for Europe, meaning the countries that are members of the European community, European Union, to come together to develop a coordinated defense plan. And let's look at some of the provisions of the white paper, which sets out this comprehensive plan to rearm Europe and build its defense. Here's what she says. Europe faces an acute and growing threat. And the only way we can ensure peace is to have the readiness to deter those who would do us harm. We have many strong foundations, such as our potential to unleash vast resources and latent technological and industrial power. But we are also starting from a position in which our defense readiness has been weakened by decades of underinvestment. Our continent is currently being affected by war, aggression, and other hostile acts. The European Union has immense wealth and productive power and deep faith in the importance of the democratic values shared across all member states. But it is being coerced by external actors who are mobilizing their resources and using technology more to achieve their objectives. And note this, they are directly threatening our way of life and our ability to choose our own future through democratic processes. They believe that we are politically unable to summon a meaningful and strategically enduring response. The international order is undergoing changes of a magnitude not seen since 1945, since the last World War in Europe. And these changes are particularly profound in Europe because of its central role in the major geopolitical challenges of the last century. The political equilibrium that emerged from the end of the Second World War and then the conclusion of the Cold War has been severely disrupted. However wistful we may be about this old era, we need to accept the reality that it is not coming back. But a new international order will be formed in the second half of this decade. Note this. A new international order will be formed in the second half of this decade and beyond. And unless we shape this order in both our region and beyond, we will be passive recipients of the outcome of this period of interstate competition with all the negative consequences that could flow from this, including the real prospect of full-scale war. Remember, God has put it in their minds. So this is what their mind is now producing. We need to get together because we could find ourselves being dominated by others and we're not going to have it. Europe faces a fundamental choice about its future. Does it want to muddle through the years ahead attempting to adapt to new challenges in an incremental and cautious way? Or does it want to decide its own future, free from coercion and aggression, ensuring that the people of Europe are able to live in security, peace, democracy, and prosperity? It says, if we respond to this moment with determination, note, collective action, God will put it in their hearts to come together, and a clear strategy, we will strengthen our place in the world and renew our international alliances on a more sustainable basis. We will enable a renewal of the European project and improve the security, prosperity, and well-being of our citizens. If we continue on the same path, however, we will end up diminished, divided, and vulnerable. So they see the division. But now the idea that has gone in their mind, they were always divided and vulnerable. But suddenly they see a need to cooperate and unite. Because somebody asks you, well, say, listen, why don't you put 2.5% of your budget towards defense? I've been protecting you for 50 years. How about if you step up to the plate and put 2% of your budget? And suddenly, the international order is changed. You're not going to accept that anymore. You're now going to get involved in your own way. Europe must do more, far more, if it is to restore credible deterrence and deliver the security on which our prosperity depends. This requires all member states to act in solidarity and to invest in our collective defense. This means joining together. Europe faces other growing threats and security challenges in its region and beyond. Strategic competition is increasing in our wider neighborhood. From the Arctic to the Baltic, somebody was saying maybe we should acquire Iceland, or Greenland, sorry. That's a threat now. Iceland to the Baltic, the Middle East, and North Africa, which, as I said, once was part of the Roman Empire. Tunisia, Ethiopia, Somalia, they were once part of the Roman Empire. Under Mussolini, transnational challenges such as rapid technological change, migration, and climate change could put immense stress on our political and economic system. Traditional allies and partners such as the United States are also changing their focus away from Europe to other regions of the world. We need a stronger and more resilient defense industrial base. We need an ecosystem of technological innovation for our defense industries to keep pace with changes in the character of war. We need to learn the lessons from it and extrapolate to a possible large-scale conflict. Large-scale conflict means a big war in the future, near future. We need faster and more efficient procurement, new ways of working with allies and partners who share the same goals. Rebuilding European defense requires, as a starting point, a massive investment over a sustained period. Germany, which had things built into its constitution, overruled it. They now have permission, and they plan to get 500 billion euros to invest in defense. Together, we must accelerate work on all strands to urgently ramp up European defense readiness to ensure that Europe has a strong and sufficient European defense posture, note this, by 2030 at the latest. It's happening now, brethren. They started. Thereby also increasing our contribution to transatlantic society. And this white paper that Ursula von der Leyen wrote provides a framework for the Rearm Europe plan. Note, rearm. That's where they started with. Laying out the case for a once-in-a-generation surge. Once in a generation. They've been there since 1945, but once in a generation surge. It's now gone into their mind that this is what they need to do in European defense investment. It's kind of instructive because it says they will fight Christ and he will destroy them. So it's really going to be once in a generation investment. It sets out the necessary steps to rebuild European defense. For the short term, this white paper lays out concrete options for collaboration. Note again, collaboration. It says God will put in their minds to come together. Collaboration among member states to urgently replenish their stocks of ammunition, weapons, and military equipment. It proposes that member states urgently pool their efforts, again, collaboration, to address these gaps, including through a set of defense projects of common European interest to be defined by member states that would benefit the EU incentives. It says EU support to collaborative capability development will thus facilitate EU member states in NATO to deliver on their capability targets more quickly and economically with enhanced interoperability from the outset. So in other words, instead of you doing something on your own and I building on my own, if we get together, we could build something bigger than the sum of its parts. Again, it is now gotten into their minds to do this. Russia will remain a fundamental threat to Europe's security for the foreseeable future, including its more aggressive nuclear posture and the positioning of nuclear weapons in Belarus. And then it mentioned China's actions in the East and South China Seas are destabilizing the region, while its growing military projection in the South Pacific and Indian Ocean is raising concerns among European partners. Conflicts, instability, and growing violent extremism across Africa, including the Sahel, Libya, and Sudan, have direct security and economic implications for Europe and will continue to breed instability. Geopolitical rivalries have not only led to a new arms race, but have provoked a global technology race. And how do they propose to address this? It says, which will be the main feature of competition in this new geopolitical environment? And note, a handful of critical and foundational technologies like AI, artificial intelligence, quantum, biotech, robotics, and hypersonic now referring to jets that can fly over 3,500 miles an hour, are key inputs for both long-term economic growth and military preeminence. So they're now looking to get military preeminence, which none of them can achieve on its own. But if they get together, this can happen. As such, technology diffusion for commercial purposes must be reconciled with more rigid technology ecosystems to advance national security objectives. Again, meaning weaponry. The EU strategic competitors are heavily investing in this area. In a harsher world of hyper-competitive and transactional geopolitics, reaching across different theaters, the EU needs to be able to effectively counter any challenge and be ready for even the most extreme military contingencies, such as armed aggression. Meaning, if another world war comes, we got to be ready to face it. And it says, under a heading, European Readiness 2030, the white paper says, given the changes in the strategic environment, it is important for Europe to build up sufficient deterrence capacity, meaning weapons, to prevent a potential war of aggression. Member states will always retain responsibility for their own troops. They will give their power to the beast. From doctrine to deployment and for the definition needs of their armed forces. The EU will always act in a way that is without prejudice to the specific character of the security and defense policy of certain member states, and taking into consideration the security and defense interests of all member states. And here we can see now the roots of the character of the union. That, as the Bible says, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they won't cleave to one another. You want to come here, but you can have and decide your own policies. That might only be so for a while. So they have this, and they're allowing other countries still to decide that, we may or we may not. But when it has been done, there's going to be no place else to go. It says rebuilding European defense, and note European, not national, European, requires action across several dimensions in close coordination with NATO. Urgent action and investment are needed to replenish member states' depleted stocks of military hardware and equipment. Going forward, developing large-scale pan-European cooperation, again meaning all Europe cooperating now, to address critical capability gaps in priority areas is a strategic necessity that will take several years to accomplish. So it is all the more urgent to intensify such efforts now. This white paper sets out 7 priority areas which are critical to build a robust European defense. The priority capability areas are the following: air and missile defense, artillery systems, all of these linked to AI, ammunition and missiles, drones and counter-drones systems, again, more AI involved, military mobility, AI, quantum, cyber and electronic warfare. Alejandro, you probably could get jobs there because they don't have enough people at this point in time to fill all the computer technologies. Strategic enablers and critical infrastructure protection. And here's what they said: lack of collaboration has led to these inefficiencies. So now that they want to eliminate it, they recognize lack of collaboration. But the lack of collaboration has been there from however long. But they have now decided to get rid of these and eliminate these inefficiencies. And how do you do it? By collaboration. Has led to inefficiencies in the development of defense capabilities and imposed additional costs on all member states. Capability gaps can be closed through the acquisition of capabilities for high-intensity warfare in line with EU and NATO capability processes. The scale, cost, and complexity of most projects in these areas go beyond member states' individual capacity. So no one country could do it on its own. But if we get together, we can give it. Collaborative procurement is the most efficient means to procure large numbers of ammunition, missiles, and drones. And also to deliver on more complex projects. It says member states have agreed a common target of 35% of total defense equipment procurement to be done collaboratively. We're going to join. Staff is to share their expertise as appropriate. And based on the outcome of this dialogue, here's what they said. The Commission will present a dedicated defense omnibus simplification proposal by June 2025. Just over a month away. They're going to present this. So look for it in the papers. It will be made public. This will in particular aim at increasing the cross-certification of defense products and facilitating mutual recognition of certification where appropriate, enabling the rapid grant of construction and environmental permits for defense industrial projects as a matter of public interest priority, ensuring the timely and lawful availability and usability of all necessary materials and other inputs in the supply chain, in particular for essential uses for which adequate substitutes are not available. And they mentioned removing the obstacles to the availability at relevant times and locations of military personnel, removing obstacles related to access to finance, including ESG investment, which Germany has already started. The Constitution forbade them from making more than 2% investment. They removed it. And they are going to go on the market to get 500 billion euros to invest in the military. And someone was saying this week, Germany, as the biggest and most powerful entity there, needs to have that kind of military presence. Facilitating the exchange of confidential and sensitive information under conditions that ensure both simplicity and security of handling. And streamlining EU defense industrial programs to reduce the delivery time because they have a deadline 5 years from now. To simplify the management of EU-funded projects and simplify the treatment of member states' co-funding. And they said, based on this review, the aim should be to simplify and speed up the rules and procedures of the European Defense Fund. And so, brethren, we are seeing something starting in the grouping that emerged from the Holy Roman Empire. In the aftermath of the destruction of the Sixth Revival, when the Nazis and the fascists in Italy, Europe was destroyed. And the US went in with the Marshall Plan, etc., rebuilt. They're now seeing it fit to prepare themselves for the final revival that, as the Revelation 17 tells us, they will oppose Christ when he returns, because he will come in the days of these kings. And so, brethren, it says watch. Watch next month and see when more of this information comes out. Because it says, we don't know when the time will come. But we're seeing aspects of it now beginning to be firmed up. And therefore, if we see these things, then as it says, we should know that the time is coming and it is going to be close at hand.